Hey there everyone, AJ back again for the Mighty Gluestick channel. In this episode of the Demon series, we're going to learn all about the Sibriex, and be warned, this one's not for the faint of heart. In the literature, they were first detailed in the 3rd edition of the Fiendish Codex 1, Hordes of the Abyss, published in 2006, and they've been part of the game ever since, and I think one of the most important elements in the lore, the mythology, if you will, of Dungeons & Dragons in regards to the origin story of the demons and the genesis of the Abyss, which is why they're probably one of the first videos in the Demon series which I think really needs to be made. When Tharizdun plunged the Shard of Ultimate Evil into the heart of the elemental chaos, the surge of destruction this caused destabilized the entire matrix of the cosmos, which in turn freed the last of the Obyriths from their decaying universe, as the ultimate evil corrupted the primal forces of creation and tunneled a living gateway into the ruined Obyrith universe. Of the countless horrors that poured through the breach, the most powerful of these creatures adapted to the alien physical and mental constraints of the new reality and became demon lords, while the lesser members of their kind were torn into their component parts and reabsorbed by the absolute corruption rampaging through the dimensional barriers, devastating parallel realms and demi-planes of the Abyss as the Abyss was born. The demons known as Sibriexes were spawned from the clans of Obyrith slavers, savants, and fleshcrafters who were torn apart and somehow regurgitated by the living corruption of the Abyss itself. Spawned from lakes of heaving flesh and spurting geysers of pus and bile, they churned and ripped, shredded and gnawed on each other, not knowing where one ended and the other began. They consumed each other and arose as a new form of foul life, a bloated abomination and a mockery of organic life in the form of a malformed, obscenely mutated and twisted head, the size of a wagon. With a constant drizzle of noxious fluids oozing from every vile orifice, the Sibriex has small, stumpy arms where a head's ears would normally be. Below a jagged, frothing, and constantly gnashing, putrid mouth is a nightmarish conglomeration of what might supposedly be exposed organs and ponderous sacks of writhing, bubbling decay. The stench of the Sibriex is an intense miasma that wafts as it floats in the air, and cutting into its raw, infested flesh is a harness that mounts 4 sturdy steel chains ending in wicked hooks that serve to anchor it to the ground or can be moved with telekinetic force like they were metallic tentacles, dragging the drifting monster along at 20 feet per round. As horrific as they sound, I'm barely scratching the surface of what it's like to see one of these things in person. Imagine that you have fought your way into the bowels of the ancient abyss to cut out the heart of the cosmic cancer once and for all. You fight legions of snapping, snarling, vicious and frenzied personifications of every kind of evil that exists, and finally, through a putrid mist of virulent disease gases, you are confronted by at last by this looming mass of the Sibriex. The chains twist and slam down, biting with massive hooks that gouge into the fleshy floor, which twitches and bleeds as the thing turns, fixing a baleful gaze on you. You begin to hear a hoarse primal screaming, a creature in horrible suffering, right beneath you perhaps, and the feeling as in your body goes cold and numb. You feel completely detached. Your whole reason for being here, for existing, has become confusing, as the revolting, bloated and mutated face before you is your own, staring back at you, and you realize that the pitiful screaming you can feel with the sizzling pain in your lungs and throat must be coming from your own body. They warned you that looking at an Obyrith could drive a mortal insane, and now, if you live long enough to ever reflect on this moment, you'll know why. Going up against one of these is extremely dangerous. So let's take a look at the latest incarnation. Well, we'll kind of summarize, which it's found on pages 137 and 138 of Mordenkainen's Tome of Foes, with some comparisons with the older depictions. They're pretty close actually, and here's my suggestions for how an encounter with these things could play out. If you want the stats for this thing, they released the page showing the Sibriex as one of their teasers for the book, so it's actually freely available. First, you do not meet these things alone. They are always surrounded by teeming masses of shrieking and moaning lemures who slop about in puddles and streams of potently disgusting fluids that squelch and burble over a terrain of maggots, worms and sentient organs, twitching flesh bits and much worse, guzzling foul handfuls of torn gore or slurping from the vomitous pools are Ruttican mobs, and chewing through the mounds of discarded flesh are savage abyssal maws. Nameless mutant horrors prowl the nightmare terrain. It is a foul and twisted terrain here that it's so bad that navigation becomes confusing. There's so much corruption, movement, and hideousness that it's like the worst imagining of what the foul realm could be like have been frantically recreated by a demented school of psychopathic serial killers. Limbs, bone, blood, flesh, organs, eyes, and screaming maws, twisting tongues, tentacles, diseased meat, hairy skin, sweat, shit, spit, bile, pus, all covers you in moments. It's like it's raining from the sky and squirting or spattering from every direction. It's as is typical of demon hordes. It's a disorganized, chaotic mess, a morass of creatures, a menagerie of horrors that probably the most intense you'll ever encounter in the abyss, even in the deep abyss. And this is the just off the charts in horrific gore. Things that should not be alive are lurching about, screaming and mewling while they are being eaten alive by other revolting and lethal looking mutants. The landscape may be the bowels of some demon lord's fortress, or it could be the steaming vent of a volcanic heat surrounded by jagged chasms that are very hard to spot under this carpet of corruption, this zerg. This whole area reeks and creeps. It moves, and you can see things that have been half-eaten are being reabsorbed into the flesh mass. There are gibbering mouths oozing out of pustulant, enormous burst boils and exploding geysers of foul ichor that are full of rot grubs and some sort of nightmare scourge swarm. As you stalk, concealed perhaps, through all of this, or fight as best you can, blasting and cleaving through the endless horrors, you can hear and smell the presence of the Sibriex before you get to it. It towers above the scene, leering eyes darting about and its wicked intellect burning behind them. Its thunderous orders shouting out to its minions, select horrors with twisted forms, giants with many gnarled, grafted limbs, conglomerations of mammal, crustacean and insect parts who will swiftly converge on and restrain you, as any new arrival in the Sibriex lair is bound to be bound. They are living tools, these things that it's ordering about, and around it, strewn around, are kind of living mutated furniture that the Sibriex has crafted for its own use. It will mutate some pitiful creature to house an enormous bloated eye and this glowing eyeball, which then it magnifies something that it's like it uses it like a magnifying glass to peer at a specimen shoved into this poor creature's broken mouth. Will plunge one of its quivering sucker tendrils into the open brain case of some creature to usurp control of it, to cast additional spells or extend its telepathic power. The Sibriex constantly demands more flesh for its work. What it is trying to create, nobody knows. It has a mind that's like a hornet's nest of sadists, and watching how it works is a very bad idea. You thought the landscape and its pets were bad. All I can say is that it being warped and mutated by the Sibriex is one of the worst things that can happen to you, to anyone. As you approach the Sibriex, the difficult terrain is sploshing and soaking you with its filth. The air is becoming more and more poisonous. Within 30 feet of the Sibriex itself, it becomes an aura of corruption as the living power of the abyss itself is channeled by the Sibriex intelligence. At this range, your folly becomes clear as your own body begins to twist and mutate. As an elemental entity can effortlessly glide through rock, water, fire or air, the abyssal energy flows through flesh, and the Sibriex's true sight detects everything within 120 feet of itself. With its awareness, it manipulates the power of the abyss to essentially break down living things into their component parts. And the next few rounds and the DC 20 Constitution saving throws you will be making are all that stands between your character and certain horrible death. This lethal assault and the poisonous fumes would be bad enough, but the Sibriex is an impatient killer and will lash out with its telekinetically directed chain hooks, ripping open torsos, severing limbs, beheading and plunging into the bodies of its newest playthings, eagerly dragging them closer to inspect what new components it can use to craft into its next monster. Who knows how many bizarre horrors across the multiverse this thing has made? Did it create the first hook horror? Did one of them teach Lolth how to mutate drow into driders? What we do know is that the Queen of Chaos, when she discovered what had become of the lesser Obyrith after they encountering the first of the spawned Sibriexes, hatched her own plan to use them to channel fresh mortal souls into the abyss and the wretched flesh pits, so that the Sibriex could craft an enormous, endless legion of minions under her command. The Sibriex flesh warpers are megalomaniacs, of course, and channeled immense power immense amounts of power into the first creation, resulting in the demon lord we know as Demogorgon. And because obox-ob, another Obyrith demon lord, was feeding massive power into the living abyss, the Sibriex would keep on creating demon lords that were too powerful for the Queen of Chaos to control. So she immediately struck down obox-ob with as much force as she could, playing every card she had in a masterstroke of betrayal that probably saved the multiverse from a swift end, and transferred the new, slower, more controlled corruption and destruction of the multiverse under her command now. With less potent power to channel into her work, the Sibriex began to spawn the creatures and the distinctive body shapes of the Tanar'ri demons, and the legions of the abyss were born. Of course, this makes the Sibriex some of the oldest beings in the cosmos of Dungeons and Dragons, in the multiverse of it, and they hold incredible amounts of knowledge about the history of, well, everything. Of course, however, getting access to that information means dealing with the Sibriex themselves and their supreme, insane levels of ambition. They are not just corruptors of flesh and mind, they would be overlords of the entire multiverse, and they look at all other entities as nothing more than components, more tools, more playthings to be toyed with and manipulated to achieve whatever they want. They never give away anything for free. They always demand their pound of flesh. And yes, that can be taken quite literally. And despite this danger, demons flock to them to further grafting and empowering of their physical forms. And they willingly subject themselves. They're ultimately responsible. The Sibriex are ultimately responsible for the genesis of the demons after all. For this reason, the Sibriexes, of which there are only now a few hundred left, are all hotly contested prizes of the demon lords, as to hold one in an abyssal domain is to have exclusive access to the legions of horrors that the Sibriexes can constantly create, and to be gatekeepers to the demons that would seek further enhancement from them. Also, if the demon lords maintain a barely sufficient supply of fresh meat to the Sibriexes they host, they can bargain for exclusive access to the deep well of terrible secrets the Sibriex has, locked away within its giant, bloated brain. Sibriexes have no loyalty, zero loyalty to each other. They never congregate on the same plane of existence. Each occupies a different abyssal realm, and they almost never actually appear on the prime material worlds, unless one is about to fall to a demonic invasion. They also have no real loyalty to any other being. They will gradually corrupt, weaken, and usurp the power of any being that tries to control them. Even so, the power that can be gained from them is too tempting a prize for demon lords to resist. Remember, most demon lords were not spawned from the Sibriex directly. They are mostly derived from those ancient primordial beings that were absorbed and transformed by the abyss itself, in the era when it was chewing its way through the veils of reality, corrupting layer after layer and adding to itself. So they certainly don't see the Sibriex as any of the Obyriths, or any of the Obyriths as some sort of creator race of them. Sibriex are not generally known about. Mortal cultists in the prime-material worlds are not privy to the knowledge of how the abyss began or where the demons came from. They have no idea about the true politics of the endless layers of the abyss, and information about the Sibriex is a closely guarded secret of the demonic elite. To delve into this knowledge would not only earn you their direct attention, but also very likely draw the swift ire of Vecna and the gods of light. No incursion of these creatures into the prime material worlds would go unnoticed by the divine powers. Any Sibriex that show up, well, any events that could lead to such an occurrence would form a linchpin tactical worst-case scenario in the ever-raging multiversal conflict between law and chaos. I hope you enjoyed this trip into the heart of the abyss. I'm glad I could finally shed some light on one of the primary sources of the abyssal corruption. As insane as it seems to try and destroy one of these things, there are only a limited number of them. No more can be created, and when the last of them is annihilated, the creation of new demons and monsters will slow down considerably, most likely tipping the cosmic balance and instigating the final end of the Blood War and perhaps the end of the abyss itself. Who knows? And honestly, who's even keen to try? Just a reminder, if you've not subscribed already, feel free to do so, and be sure to hit that notification bell as I upload from the other side of the world sometime in your future. For access to all the scripts and 1 week advance access to these videos, consider becoming a patron of the channel on Patreon for a minimum of just $1 per month. Join the community on our Discord server. Come say hi. Also, if you want to pick up a new video game at a significantly daily discount and help me out in the process, check out the daily deal on Chrono. And there's links below in the video description text, as well as some new link to some new merchandise if you want to get a Mighty Glue Stick mug, for instance. As always, thanks for listening. I hope I didn't gross you out too much with this one. I certainly tried. And I'll be back with more for you again very soon.